Hi, welcome to PyCon Frederick. This is June 2018, and today Christine and I are going to be covering what happened at PyCon 2018 and give you all an idea of what the conference is like and just a bit of background and some of our personal experiences while we were there and things that we learned and things that we thought were really cool that we wanted to share with this community. Christine's going to start us off in explaining a bit about what PyCon is.
So PyCon is the language's annual meeting where everyone involved with the language gets together. You have people from the community at large, and you also have the actual the software Python Software Foundation leadership all come to one place and give talks and presentations, and you'll have vendors come giving tutorials on their products and all sorts of just interaction with the community. So we have three different conferences as one almost. So you have the first part of the conference. It started earlier in the week. I don't remember, it was Tuesday or something. The first few days were tutorials. I think Matt spent some time with a few different going through a few different tutorials that he'll talk about. Then we also had, from Friday to Sunday, we had presentation days. So we had keynotes given by various speakers and a whole array of talks on different topics, from new data classes in the newest version of Python to what's going on in data science, all the various things, and even some updates to packaging dependencies. So quite a lot of different topics that were covered. Then after that whole weekend wraps up, there's a few days of developer sprints where everyone can get together and work on various open source projects, and you get to actually interface with people one-on-one and support open source and contribute to various projects. This year it occurred in Cleveland. It was right downtown, right across from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And it'll be there next year as well. They do a 2-year cycle. So we'll find out next year what the next one will be. But in 2019, it'll be in the same place. And,
what time of year? Is it May or April?
yeah, it was May 12th through the, I don't remember the final day, but it was the middle of May.
Oh, well, yeah, there's an amusement park in Sandusky, Ohio. And I was thinking if I could find an excuse,
There you go.
to ride all the roller coasters, but I suspect they don't open until later in the year. I could be wrong.
Well, it seems to be warm, so it could be open.
I guess the weather is sort of hit or miss in Cleveland at that time of year. We had some days that were rainy and some days that were very nice and sunny. So
yeah,
kind of a mix.
I think they said next year it's not going to be on Mother's Day weekend.
Yeah, hopefully not. I called my family and my mom while sitting in a conference room. But they did have dedicated internet for calling your mom on Mother's Day or calling your wife, whoever, or your significant other. It's pretty cool. So I'm going to speak a little to tutorials. So there are a couple of days of tutorials, and the tutorials are events that are, there are even two varieties of tutorials. There are tutorials that are run by individuals who have prepared something to show off, but there are also companies that have sponsored tutorials as well. So if you're interested in learning about XYZ's company and technology, they have some of those too. So what's nice about tutorials is it's really like a training time, as you would guess, where you have the opportunity to learn something maybe completely different. So you might be working in embedded stuff using Python and decide you want to learn about web technology, or vice versa. They have a little bit of something for everybody. And what I've listed here as examples are actually the 3 tutorials that I went to. So I prefaced this all with I'm a web developer by trade or by career. So these were things that I wanted to learn a little bit more about. The first example that's listed was a data science exploration, where we had a data set that was all about movies and what can we learn about the Oscars by exploring past data. So the idea was, we're going to get a data set, we're going to massage it a little bit and try and use some of the common data science tools like pandas to see what can we learn about this? Can we find any interesting correlations? So that was a data exploration exercise. This next one, workflow engines up and running, was about using complicated workflow tools. So if you are working in a big system that has a lot of interdependencies and you need tasks that kick off other tasks that do other things, or things that need to happen on cycles and schedules, and you need to scale that out to large amounts of computation, we covered some popular tools in the Python ecosystem to do that. One was called Luigi, the other was called Airflow. And then finally, this was actually my favorite one, was build a GitHub bot workshop. It was actually run by one of the Python core developers, and she covered how you do exactly this, how you interface with GitHub and make a bot that can automatically comment on new issues, react to things. The idea is, like, here's the tools that Python, the core Python team themselves use to make sure that their interactions with the community is as streamlined as possible. So if for example, you are submitting code to a pull request to this code base, they have a bot that responds that gives you a checklist of, here are all the things that you need to do before we can accept this code. And so it saves the interaction and that potential lost communication time. So it's really a cool thing. So each of these taught me new skills, and this is just a sampling. So there's they were all over the board about what you could learn, but it was really a lot of fun. And then those run for 2 days, and they're kind of a precursor to the main event for the conference.
So the conference days starting on Friday, there were multiple tracks throughout the entire time. So we had various talks going on at the same exact time in different rooms. So it was not possible to visit everything, but both Matt and I visited different talks and actually got to get a pretty broad breadth of what was offered. One of the talks that I've, since I'm in business intelligence, more on the data science side of Python, one of the talks I was excited about was by Matthew Rockland, who is a contributor to a package called, or a framework called Dask. So Dask is a distributed framework for data science in Python. The biggest selling point to that framework is it leverages the APIs of NumPy and Pandas and scikit-learn, so you don't really have to relearn a new tool set to get started. The thing that was the biggest takeaway from this talk was Matt actually went through a full workflow using this tool and using a stack that's actually live and used in meteorology. He used a few examples and the scale that was needed and driven by Dask. So it was a very thorough kind of start from the problem of, you have this large data set of petabytes of data you have to work with, and how this framework can help with computing that. Next, one of the other talks I went to was given by one of the board members of Python Software Foundation. I think he's also a core developer with the language. Kenneth Wrights. He has built together a new version of kind of the next stage in package dependency for Python. The talk actually didn't spend a lot of time on the new packaging, but actually really helped contextualize what the problem was and the whole history of managing dependencies and packages in Python, and how pip today that a lot of us use for getting new libraries is a great leap forward from what we had not that long ago, but PIMPIV goes the next step in kind of illustrating how, what the problem it was solving. Again, also being biased towards data science, I don't have a lot of, I don't necessarily have the same need for the dependency management as much, but I felt it was a great talk to just kind of see the larger ecosystem, because I do consume, I use pip all the time for getting new packages. Another talk that I went to was a new framework called QPy, and this is again data science focus, where a Japanese company has developed a framework to interact to leverage the CUDA framework for GPU on NVIDIA GPUs using the same API as NumPy. It has a lot of tool sets to make it really easy to do, relatively easy to do complex computation with a GPU, and it has a lot of built-in tools to measure bottlenecks in the memory and management in the workflow. So it's pretty really focused on hardcore computation for a GPU, but it's a very slick tool.
So the next three talks that are listed here are talks that I found particularly interesting. Let me ask you guys a question. Do any of you have formal computer science background training, like educated as a computer scientist? I'm seeing like half hands. So this is actually a really fantastic talk for people that don't have that kind of background, because what Big O notation is a way to talk about computer algorithms and data structures and look at their performance characteristics given really large sets of numbers. So it's a fantastic tool for that. But when in the context of a computer science program, it's often, I should say, shrouded in a bunch of terminology that can be sort of confusing for people. And so Ned Batchelder he's a longtime presenter at PyCon and made it a really approachable for this topic of Big O. So if you're wanting to understand computers a little better and how algorithms are kind of assessed in their overall performance characteristics, this is a really good one to use. I think it would go a long way in a lot of classrooms to be taught this way. It kind of cuts through all the bullcrap about like you don't actually need to know X, Y, Z term, or when people say this term, it's really just a fancy way to say this thing in plain English. So it was a really excellent presentation. The second one I've listed here, because I'm a web developer, this was particularly interesting to me. We have the challenge of how do you scale web applications that serve a lot of customers and can meet their needs, and write your web application in a way that can be plugged into a larger ecosystem and do it in a way that's seamless and a way that is very good for operations. So the presenter, his name is, well, I'm going to butcher his name probably, but I know his first name is Hinnick, I believe. And he is kind of an operations-minded guy that has a lot of good tools that help support this stuff. And he talked about what you do with your logging from your application, from your just deployment tools, and the way you think you should structure your application to handle stuff like how do you ingest secrets. So if you have to talk to APIs that do secrets management, what do you do there? How do you deal with different kinds of configurations? So if you're in a production environment versus a testing environment, and you have different, and your application has different internal switches and modes that it needs to maintain to do that kind of stuff. He talked about all those kind of things. It was a really interesting talk. Finally, Raymond Henninger is a popular Python instructor or consultant. He teaches a lot about Python, and he spent his talk time covering a language feature that's coming out in Python 3.7. So Python's continuing it releases, I think, almost every year, and data classes is a new thing that's coming in that. So if you've written much Python, maybe you've written what can sometimes feel like a C struct, where it's a thing that you want to hold data, and that's pretty much it. But if you had to actually do that, you make a class and you make a dunder init method, and you have all your parameters, and then in your init method you're doing stuff like if your parameters were foo bar, you're doing self.foo equals foo, self.bar equals bar. It's a lot of boilerplate, and it's sort of needless. And so what a data class does is it lets you say, you put a decorator on the top of your class definition that says @data class, @ data class. And then underneath your class, you, using like class variables, basically define the different parameters that you want. And the data class actually acts as a, well, let's listen here, as a code generator to generate the proper class that would do that wiring for you that you'd otherwise have to do yourself. So Raymond really explored this topic in a lot of depth and made it clear of like why certain design decisions were made. It was a really interesting talk. The neatest point about all this stuff is that PyCon every year does a fantastic job of posting all of these videos to YouTube. So, you know, we reviewed some of them here, and if some of these sounded interesting to you, you can go watch them. The recordings are very well done. So you often have no trouble understanding whatever the presenter is talking about, and you can really, they have a kind of a side-by-side view where you get the slides very clearly, and you also get the presenter's view. So anything that you want that's out there is available for consumption, which is a pretty fantastic resource for anybody wanting to learn more about PyCon.
So I add some pictures just to give context to the scope of the what was going on. So this is actually the main vendor, and I guess I don't remember the name of the area, but you can see it's a very large group of in attendance. We have also our keynote stage with a nice little plug to AWS and Conda there. So if we can give a little.
How many people are at the conference?
I don't know that I heard a specific
I think
count.
it's roughly in the 3,500 range, so it's not a small group of people, for sure.
Yeah.
But I think they want to cap it so that it doesn't grow much larger than that, because you can get to a conference where you've got 12 tracks going and it's just totally overwhelming. So this is, keep in mind, this is still a very large conference. There's still a lot that's going on. You feel like I'm only doing like 20% of what's here because there's so much, but that's the rough size.
And these are also some of the other features of the conference. This is part of the open spaces that were available. So, open spaces is instead of having scheduled talks or events ahead of time, you could only schedule it during the event. So there'd be various rooms that were open for that, and there'd be all sorts of different events. I think Matt went to this one here. Was it Python Bytes recording?
Python Bytes is a popular Python podcast, and they did a live recording with the crowd that, normally this is just these two guys, Brian and Michael Kennedy, Brian Hawken, they're not related. And they chat about Python news in the ecosystem, and so they did it to a live crowd to just kind of have some extra energy in there. So that was a fun open space.
And so there was so many various topics. So I also went to open space that was kind of a follow-up to one of the main presentations. It was done by a quantum computing company called Rigetti, and they were showing off their API that they were releasing. So it was interesting to see, like, you could actually get hands-on introduction to a new, something new, and get to follow up with something that already, kind of a part two of one of the talks that was given.
I like the developer hours there. 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. That's when those go.
Yeah.
Did either of you go to the data open space?
I didn't. I heard about it afterwards.
There was in the swag bags was a little micro Python trinket.
Yeah.
And the people from Adafruit that published them had an open space there. Actually, I think 2 of the days. And I was at a different meeting, so I got there late, but it was pretty impressive that people actually show you how to get these things up and running.
It's super. So the Adafruit that he's talking about is the Gemma. It's a Gemma N0 device, I think is the product name. It's Gemma something, so it's with some letters after it. And you literally plug in a USB cable, and it looks like a mounted drive on your hard drive with a main.py file that is running MicroPython. I used to, we run our open workshop every month, and I brought it to the last one just to play with it. And it is cool. It's a really cool little device that has a lot of power in there, and the fact that you can program Python on a microcontroller is super neat.
What does this do exactly?
It's got Python on that little. So
If you plug that in, you see two things. One is it mounts like a hard drive, so it's like a USB drive with some memory. And if you drag a thing called main.py on it, it'll run whatever code's in that Python script. You can also, if you have PuTTY or something that Telnet, you can connect to the serial port. It shows up as a serial port as well, and you get a Python REPL, so you can actually type Python commands live. So it's MicroPython on a computer that they basically gave away in the swag bag.
yeah. So it's the size of it. So for people in the recording that can't see it, it's a chip that's the size of a quarter or so.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's a pretty neat little device.
Did they do a tutorial? I think there might have been a tutorial video as well on YouTube. So
Okay.
there, I could be wrong. I could be mistaken about that, but I think they actually had one a filmed tutorial they did earlier before the talk. So if you're more interested in learning about the microcontroller, I think it's on YouTube.
Yeah. What this shot is also showing is, and that's hard to make out, is that the topics on here were really anything.
Yes.
Anything. It didn't have to be Python. So I thought that was really cool, as an opportunity for the community to say, like, we have different interests that extend beyond Python, the language that we're here to talk about, but let's find commonality on other parts of this, which is really cool.
Last year I went to a couple of those. I don't get me wrong, I liked the canned conference things, but these, you had people coming out of the woodworks that you're just like, who are you? Oh, you're that person? No. Like I went to, the one that stuck out was I went to the guy that wrote the logging for Python,
Okay.
and like he went into just like crazy level, like level 100 depth of why Python logs this way, and it was, I learned more about logging in Python than I could have ever wanted to know.
Yeah, and the downside of workshops is that they're not recorded. Like they're, and so I spent most of my time at workshops actually, because I knew that I could go onto YouTube later and see the recorded presentations. So they're like, if you go to PyCon at any point in the future, totally spend a lot of time at the workshop, at the open space. Excuse me.
Actually, I'd say
Conference?
how much?
What is the conference?
They have multiple tiers. So they have a standard. Was I think 200 was the, maybe it's 250.
There's a 250 student rate. So
Right.
you pick
Right.
your own basically, and
Right.
it's like an honesty system. Like if you're a student, they have a lower price. Hey, Bo. And if you're a corporate, that they have a much higher price. That they figure like your company is paying for this to cover the cost. So it's over a range. I think the corporate one was like 700
Yeah, I
or
was supposed to
something
say
like that.
750 something. Yeah.
Pretty reasonable for a business to pay for it. But
How many days is it?
Well, it depends on how much you want to do. So you have 3 days prior to the talks, you'll have the tutorials, and then it's another 3 days where you'll have the various tracks and talks and the open spaces, and then there I think it's 2 or 3 days. There's
it's actually 4 days.
4 days.
4 days of developer sprints.
Right. So it's over. It straddles 2 weeks.
God,
but
that's
people-
the longest conference I've ever heard.
Right, so
It's like
people,
Woodstock, everybody just camping out.
Yeah, it's a good time.
one of the things I spent a lot more time in the talks, and really wish I spent more time in open spaces and the hallway track, as it's called. We'll talk about that, but and before moving on from here, the hallway track is another kind of thing where you can just bump into people in the language. So after Kenneth's talk, I ended up with a group that was, we just spent a good hour talking about pipenv and diving into the nuts and bolts of how it worked, and it was quite fascinating. But it was something that was beyond the scope of the talk, but it's something that would only occur in person. Like, you can view the talk online, but you wouldn't necessarily get that kind of interaction outside of being there in person.
Yeah, and as Patrick noted, this is the place where you meet people that write the biggest libraries that are used by the ecosystem, which is a really cool experience because they're pretty sharp people. So the final thing, I think this might be the final thing I'm talking about today, is the actual developer sprints. So the developer sprints, the conference is wound down. Most people a large percentage of people are going home, but there is a big open source Python ecosystem that's out there. And since people are already there and people have come in from all over the world, they take the opportunity to break out into groups of, in some way, kind of like open spaces where the different rooms are free form in what's going to be in there, but there are spaces set aside to work on various projects that are popular in the system and to shoulder to shoulder, rapidly be fixing things or adding features to things and solving real problems, taking advantage of that face time that's there. So I think if I go again in the future, I will spend a lot more time at the developer sprints because they were really fantastic. The presentations are fun where you get to see people talk about things, but let's be honest, we're developers. Most of us actually really like writing code. So we're most at our element when we've got laptops open and can be looking at terminals and fixing things. And so this was a ton of fun. I went and worked on Warehouse, which is the project that powers the Python package index. It's actually the software web application that's backing it, and was able to contribute a couple of fixes there and add new features to that. So, and had I done that at home, it would have taken way longer because I ran into issues with the setup process, and I would have been stuck at home, or not stuck forever, but I would have been slowed down trying to figure out well, how do I even get going? And it kind of raises the question of would I have even gotten over that hurdle to actually make that contribution happen? But because folks were there that were the core contributors to a project like Warehouse, they were able to say oh yeah, that's this problem. Let's quickly get this ironed out so you can get going. So it was a really collaborative environment. They also, one cool thing about it is they assume that a good percentage of people don't have training using tools like GitHub or even how to contribute to open source. So they have kind of a crash course that was a couple hours long saying here's how we get the right version of Python installed in your system. Here's how we get GitHub going. Here's a sample project where you can walk through it and experience everything you need to do so that when you go into the actual sprinting part, you're not fumbling around wondering what am I going to do or who's going to help me get started. So they've really put a lot of thought into this is a thing where we want everybody to be as effective as possible. So we're going to invest some time into doing that training, which is also a great thing to you go home and now you know how to use GitHub if you didn't in the past. So I thought that was a really cool aspect of it that I would not have known unless I was there for the good part of the first day to experience what that was like. And the training was pretty solid. Being someone who already knows how to do that stuff, I could observe it from a different perspective and see they're offering training in a really great way. So that's developer sprints. It was a ton of fun. and definitely a really valuable part of the conference.
I've been to a lot of Android conferences, and you go there, and the presenters are like, well, Google released Kotlin 2 months ago, so I'm assuming you're all using it now. And here's the project on GitHub. Download it. It doesn't compile. Well, I'm using Canary Edition, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of that kind of stuff was avoided because of the very thoughtful people, which is cool. So I think that's what we really have to present tonight. Hopefully you all have a better understanding of what PyCon is about, that it's really about a lot of things all at once, and that if you get the chance in the future and you have even a remote interest in Python, I would totally recommend it. I think it's a really, really, really cool event. So thank you.
Hey, one more thing about the developer sprints. I actually participated in the one from IB, the guys who do Toga and the other one, and they're offering these challenge coins if you actually get one of your pull requests accepted. And I managed to do that the first day with a lot of help from the people there to do that, including that that session that kind of get people started on sprint. So that was it. Pass that around too. See what that. They were, as an extra incentive to get people to work on their project, they were offering this little extra trinket just to.
Which one of the PyB projects did you contribute
There
to?
was the, actually it turned out I was working on their webpage, had some broken links on it, and it was preventing other people from adding like some translations and some things they wanted to do. So basically I just cleaned up a few links, deleted 3 files and pointed up and fixed the link. And then because what was happening is they had everything automated, so your commit wouldn't be accepted unless it passed all the tests. And the tests included testing all the links that were being auto-generated. So that was kind of my contribution.
Awesome.
But actually, but it's an ongoing thing. This is actually just to get you started. I've actually had a couple other pull requests accepted by the project and other parts of it. So that was kind of a great introduction. I probably never would have approached these guys and said, "Hey, I forked your branch and I've added some stuff to it." They're having gone there and done it in person. Having done it in person, it was a whole different experience.
That's pretty cool.
What's the meaning of yak shaver?
Well, that goes to a story where a guy was gonna needed to get a ladder, so he was gonna go to the hardware store, but he lost his keys and he found them in a couch, and his couch had a rip in it, and he knew that if he didn't fix that rip, the dog had already torn out a bunch of the stuffing, so he needed to get some more yak hair stuffing. You know, it started out all he wanted to do was cut his lawn, and the next thing you know, it's shaving a yak. And literally, that's kind of how it was with this. All I wanted to do was get my environment set up, and the next thing you know, I'm trying to find out why is this link to the Monty Python G sketch been pulled down from, that was breaking their build because it had been pulled off of Yahoo. I mean, YouTube, so I had to fix that.
That's awesome.